Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. And before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well. So make sure you are subscribed. And if you're looking for more exclusive Killer Instinct content, you can always find that over on our Patreon. The Patreon link is always in the description box below for you to check out. If you're listening to us on Spotify, you can also find that link at the very top of the page in the banner. So definitely check that out if you have not already. But with that being said, let's jump into why we are here today. I am so curious to hear your guys' thoughts on today's episode and on today's case. As you can tell by the title, today we are talking about the brutal murder of a 69-year-old man named Warren Barnes and how police, in my personal opinion, stopped a future potential serial killer. This case has been pretty popular within the mainstream media over the past couple years, so some of you may or may not be familiar with this case. But regardless, I would love to hear your opinions and thoughts on it in the comments, so make sure you leave those at the end. But with that being said, let's jump right on into it today. Warren Barnes was born on May 19th, 1951 to his parents, John and Elva Barnes. Now, Warren was the epitome of don't judge a book by its cover. He had a particular appearance about him that made people automatically jump to conclusions and assumptions about his lifestyle. Warren dressed in a particular way and presented himself in a particular way that made people believe that he was homeless. He had a more rugged appearance, he wore the same clothes every day, and he was oftentimes seen walking up and down the main street of Grand Junction, Colorado. That main strip in Grand Junction where he lived, he was seen walking up and down that strip every single day, and because of that, many people automatically assumed, locals and tourists, that he was homeless. However, that was not the case. It really just was that Warren had a different way of living than everyone else. Warren had a job, he had a place to live. However, sometimes Warren did choose to not stay in the place that he was renting. He oftentimes would sleep on the street or under bridges. He had, again, just a different way of living and a different lifestyle than a lot of people. But the locals that spent their time talking to Warren and getting to know him always said that he was the kindest, most gentle human being out there. Like I said, Warren was known to hang around the main street of Grand Junction a lot of times, and most times actually, pretty much like clockwork. Warren would spend his days sitting outside of a store called Monique's Bridal. Monique's was on the main strip of Grand Junction, and over the past 4 years leading up to the year of 2021, Warren grew a friendship with the owner of Monique's Bridal, whose name is Monique. Monique and Warren got to know each other, and Monique actually kept a chair inside of her shop for Warren. Warren would go to her shop every day after he finished his work. He would pick up the chair, and then he would take the chair to the back of her shop outside and read his books and feed the birds, which were two of his favorite activities. He loved doing that. Every one of the locals who knew Warren actually coined him as the reading man because he loved to read. Now, like I said, Warren did have a job. He worked for a temp agency company and he worked full time. He worked 7 days a week and his shifts always started at 7 a.m. And Warren was completely and 100% reliable. He was very routine, so much so that he never ever missed a day of work in his life. And it was because of that on March 1st of 2021, when Warren did not show up to his temp agency job, the temp agency knew that something was very, very wrong, and they got worried about Warren. They knew that Warren was friends with Monique, so after he missed his shift, his coworkers called Monique to ask her if she had seen or heard from Warren. Now, it was when she got this call that Monique actually realized that she had not seen Warren. Warren did not come in and grab the chair like he typically did every day, and he didn't do it on the 28th of February either. Monique said that those days were just particularly busy at her shop, and it didn't even register to her at that time that Warren had not come in to grab the chair as he always did. But when she realized what was happening, this is when she got worried about Warren's well-being, so she decided to call 911 and file a missing persons report. Now, when she did that, police arrived to the shop and began talking to her about Warren. She told them everything that I just told you in regards to Warren. She said that Warren was one of the nicest, kindest people that you would ever meet, that he may have had a rugged appearance, but everyone knew that he was incredibly gentle and kind, and he would not have just gone off the face of the planet or just up and left Grand Junction without telling anyone. So she knew that something was wrong. So now that you have this piece of information, now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We are going to now go back 2 days prior to February 27th of 2021. And this is when we are going to shift gears, not just on the date, but on who we are talking about. This is when a new person comes into the picture. And this would be a 19-year-old man named Brian Kohi. Brian lived in Grand Junction as well. He lived with his parents, Terry and Brian Sr., as well as his brother. Now, on the outside looking in, this seemed like your average normal family, but Brian in particular always seemed a little bit different. Growing up in elementary school and middle school, Brian was diagnosed with ADHD, he was diagnosed with autism, and doctors recommended that his parents get him tested professionally for psychosis disorder. So he did struggle mentally. Brian definitely had mental health struggles. He struggled with anxiety and depression as well, but alongside all of that, growing up, Brian definitely had different hobbies and interests than a lot of kids his age. He had a fascination with all things morbid. He loved serial killers, and while his parents definitely took note of this, they believed that Brian was going to use these interests that he had for good reason and make a career out of it in law enforcement. And Brian, over the years, had actually confirmed his parents' beliefs. He told them that he was planning on getting in law enforcement and the military when he got older. So his parents weren't too concerned about these fascinations that he was having because he seemed to have a set plan of what he was going to do. But let's talk about February 27th of 2021, because this night started out in Brian's family's mind like any other normal night. February 27th, the family spent having a movie night. The movie that they chose to watch was called 1984. It is a science fiction thriller movie that Brian had requested. And while his parents were a little bit thrown off by the movie request choice that Brian had chosen, they just went along with it and they watched the movie together and then called it a night. Now, after going to sleep, Brian himself decided that he was going to go for a drive that night. He said that it was a full moon, he was having some thoughts, and he just wanted to clear his head and go for a drive, which is exactly what he did. But then, several hours later, in the very early morning hours of February 28th, Brian ended up calling his parents because he said he drove his car into the Colorado River. Now, I do want to kind of give you a perspective on this because, as we know, the Colorado River is a giant river. It extends over 7 states, so it's very big, but where it starts is near Grand Junction, and Brian did drive his car into it, but he drove it off of a specific boat ramp called the Blue Heron Boat Ramp, and so he was down there by the river. He drove his car onto the ramp. He said that he tried to get his car to be put into reverse and move his way back off of the ramp, but when he did that, his his car ended up going forward instead, landing in the river. Brian told his family that he drove out to this area because it was a remote area and he wanted to get some fresh air and clear his mind. And then he ultimately drove his car into the river by accident. It's important to note that the car going into the river was not supposed to happen, obviously. But when it did, Brian was able to get out of the car. Luckily, the river wasn't too deep at that point. It was about 8 feet deep, and Brian was able to manage to get out of the car, and that is when he called his parents. Now, his parents arrived to the Blue Heron boat ramp, and police arrived as well. Now, because this wasn't technically an accident involving another vehicle and Brian wasn't injured, Brian was allowed to go home. Police really didn't question him. They just wanted to make sure that he was okay physically, which it did seem like he was. And Brian was very talkative with police. He was very cooperative when speaking with them. Everyone was joking. His parents were joking. The police were laughing along. Everyone really just chalked this up to being a stupid mistake and a silly accident. And then Brian went home. Now, after Brian was driven home by his parents drove back out to the boat ramp where police and the car were. Now, at this point, police and his parents were talking back and forth. His parents were joking about how they didn't even allow Brian to get a driver's license until he was 18 years old because they were worried about Brian's well-being and his safety. And they were joking at this point that, and now the car lands in the river, and this is why we made him wait to get a license and XYZ. They were having casual conversation while police and the parents were at the boat ramp, because during this time, a tow truck had also arrived to the scene and was attempting to extract the car from the river. But while this was happening, police did notice something suspicious on the back of the car as it was being removed from the water. Below the license plate on the car, police noticed a large amount of an unknown red substance. Now, police initially, their first thought goes to, that's blood. And they worried that Brian could have potentially injured himself without knowing it. So they have Brian's parents call Brian again and ask Brian if he was sure that he was not injured, making sure that he was okay physically. And Brian answered the phone and he was very adamant that he was not physically injured, he was okay. And when asked the question of did he know what the red substance was on the back of his car, he said he didn't know what it was and he didn't know how it could have gotten there to begin with. But that was the end of it. They hung up the phone. Brian said he didn't know where the blood was coming from. Police really didn't have an answer as to where this blood could have came from either, but no one really pressed too many questions about it at that time. At the end of a long day, I like to take some time for myself, time to unwind and just have some me time. And lately for me, that has been spent playing my favorite game, June's Journey. I have talked to you guys about June's Journey before, but I'm here to tell you all about it again because I know you guys will love it just as much as I do. June's Journey is a hidden object mystery game that immerses you in a captivating detective story set against the glamorous backdrop of the 1920s. With a diverse cast of characters, each scene unfolds into a gripping murder mystery against the protagonist, June Parker, as she embarks on a quest to solve her sister's murder and uncover her family's long-buried secrets. The game is always full of activity. You can progress through the story to unlock new chapters or participate in events to win exciting in-game rewards. You can personalize, renovate, and repair your mansion and garden island within the game. Or you can choose to play solo or join a club for special competitions. This free-to-download mobile game challenges you to locate hidden objects in stunningly detailed, vibrant scenes. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to get started on June's Journey today. When it comes to eating healthy, I oftentimes find myself having a major problem. I want to eat healthy, but honestly right now I don't have the time to plan or meal prep. I'm getting married in 2025, and while I want to focus on maintaining a nutritious diet, I have a million other things on my mind that don't allow me to carve out the time for meal prepping or prioritizing healthier eating, even though that is exactly what I want, and I know that it is important for me to have. But luckily, that all changed thanks to Hungry Root. It is the easiest way to eat healthy. Hungry Root is like having your own personal shopper. They take care of your weekly grocery shopping. They recommend healthy groceries tailored to your taste, nutrition preferences, and your health goals. They make it easy to eat high-quality, nutritious food and achieve any diet or health goals, from anti-inflammatory to gut-friendly to gluten-free or dairy-free. They have high protein and so much more. They make grocery shopping simple and stress-free. This is one of my favorite things about it. Just tell them about your goals and preferences, and they will fill your cart with personalized recommendations that get smarter as they learn more about what you like and what you didn't love. Hungry Root has great options for the whole family with healthy groceries like smoothies, kid snacks, sweets, ready-to-eat meals, salad kits, and even supplements. There's no high fructose corn syrup, artificial sweeteners, or preservatives in any of Hungry Root's food. They only source top quality meat and seafood free of hormones and antibiotics. You're going to love Hungry Root as much as I do. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, you will get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/killer and use code KILLER. That's hungryroot.com/killer, code KILLER, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/killer, code KILLER. Now, once the tow company was able to get the car out of the river, they then brought the car to Brian Sr.'s house, so Brian's dad's house. Brian Sr. and Terry, they did have two separate homes. Even though they lived together and they were still married, they had two separate homes. Terry ran a daycare center out of one of these homes, so they had one that had the daycare center, and then they also had another one as well. So the car was towed to one of these homes, Brian Sr.'s home. Brian Sr. said the next morning after the car was dropped off at his home, he woke up and he decided that he was going to clean the car out. Considering it had spent a considerable amount of hours in the river, he decided to try and just clean it the best that he could. He ended up popping the hood, he took the battery out, he tried to get that to work, and then he just continued cleaning out the rest of the car. According to Brian Sr., he said that he opened the glove box of the car, which was full of water at that point, and he noticed that there was a large kitchen butcher knife inside of the glove box. And he said that he was taken aback about that, but it didn't really strike him as too odd at the time, but he remembered seeing it and thinking that is strange. Now, along with that, he also noticed that there was a wallet inside of the car, and the wallet was found in between the passenger seat and the passenger side door. So when Brian Sr. opened up the passenger door, he saw the wallet laying right in between the door and the seat. At that point, Brian Sr. said he picked up the wallet and realized that it was not his son Brian's wallet, and he opened it, and that is when he realized that it belonged to a man named Warren Barnes. Now, Brian Sr. actually found Warren's business card inside of his wallet, and he took it upon himself to call the business card number. And when he did, Brian's employer answered the phone. And Brian's employer, the temp agency, was very relieved that someone had found his wallet. They went on to say that Warren hadn't come in for his shift for the past day. And so they were curious as to where this wallet was found. And this is when things are starting to connect for Brian Sr. The dots are starting to connect for him because he's realizing that there is a wallet inside of his son's car that belongs to a man who is supposedly missing. And that is when things start clicking for him. So after calling the employer, calling the business card number, Brian Sr. hung up the phone and immediately called his son, Brian. Now, Brian told his dad over the phone that there was nothing to worry about. He said that he found the wallet while he was at the boat ramp and he decided to keep it. It was as simple and as easy as that. He found the wallet on the boat ramp and he didn't think to mention anything of it because of everything else that was going on in the past 48 hours. With the car being driven into the river, it didn't seem like the most pressing thing to mention to his parents that he found a wallet at the boat ramp. Brian said that it just slipped his mind and he didn't think to mention it. Now, that was all happening on the afternoon of February 28th. Brian Sr. cleaning out the car, Brian Sr. finding the wallet, Brian Sr. calling. That was all happening on the afternoon of February 28th. 8th. And it was on the morning of March 1st where Brian Sr. decided that he wasn't going to be able to start the car himself. And he called an auto body shop and had the car towed to the auto body shop on the morning of March 1st. Now, simultaneously, while the car was being towed to the auto body shop, Brian's mom, Terry, was actually about to make her own horrifying discovery. Terry was at her house at this time, and she was going through Brian's room. And this was something that his parents did pretty frequently. Brian was very open that this was something that they did. His parents were open that this was something that they did. Brian's parents just always wanted to make sure they were on top of whatever Brian was doing and whatever Brian had going on. You could read into that if you want to, but that is just what they decided to do. Now, while Terry was going through Brian's room, she opened Brian's closet door. And when she did, you can imagine the horror she felt when she looked down and discovered a human head inside a plastic bag. Terry immediately and understandably panicked, and she called 911 right away. Now, at this time, Brian was not home. Brian was at a friend's house during this discovery. So she calls 911 and she told the dispatcher that she believed that she found a human head wrapped in a plastic bag in her son's closet. She said that she felt confident that it was a human head because she found an ear sticking out of the plastic bag itself. She went on to say that Brian had a fascination with true crime and other things that people would consider to be morbid. He seemed to be fascinated about. But again, she said that she assumed that he would channel this into becoming a crime scene investigator. She was going through all of this, her thought process, what her beliefs were for her son, all while on the phone with the dispatcher. You could tell in the call that she was in a complete and utter state of shock. Terry went on to tell the dispatcher that after she discovered the head in the closet, she took the plastic bag and put it in the kitchen sink. She didn't know what to do. It was her first instinct to pick up the bag and put it in the sink. She also said that there was a second bag in the closet that she did not open. And again, when the dispatcher asked where Brian was at this point, Terry said that he was at a friend's house, but while she was on the phone with the dispatcher, Brian had just pulled in to the driveway. Now, police wasted no time in getting over to Terry's home, and when they did, they found Terry, Brian Sr., Brian's brother, and Brian all in the driveway of the home. When police walked up the driveway, Brian walked towards them as well, and Brian was very calm, collected, and matter of fact in speaking with authorities, and he was eerily forthcoming about the answers to the questions that they had. He told police that his mom had discovered a human head and hands in his closet. He said that one of the bags contained a human head and the other bag contained human hands. Now, it is very clear when Brian is telling police this, and again, this is all on body cam footage, there is a distinct shift in Brian's delivery. You can see it in his body language, you can see it in his face, and you can also hear it in his tone of voice. I'm going to play that clip for you right now.
Parents have some concerns of some stuff they may have found in your room?
Yeah, I believe so.
And what would it be?
A human head and hands.
Like, for real human head and hands?
Yes.
From?
That fellow who went missing recently.
Which fellow was that?
Warren Brown.
Warren Brown? When did he go missing?
The night of the 27th.
The night of the 27th? Okay, and how did you end up with him?
I murdered him.
With what?
A knife.
Why would you have done that?
I've always wondered what murder felt like.
Brian went on to say that the remains belonged to Warren Barnes, and if it wasn't clear already, Brian admitted that he was the one who murdered Warren. He stated very briefly that he was driving alongside the road on the night of February 27th, and when he was driving under a bridge, he noticed Warren sleeping underneath this bridge. Brian said that when he spotted Warren, he stopped his car, got out, and stabbed Warren to death with the knife that his his father would later find in the car. Now, regards to why Brian decided to kill Warren, he said that it was very simple. He had always wondered what it would feel like to murder someone. Brian then went on to tell police that a couple hours after the murder, his car had driven in to the Colorado River at the Blue Heron boat ramp. He said that his car going into the river was not a part of the plan. He said that his original plan was to dispose of Warren's entire body in the river, but obviously that plan went a little sideways when his car drove in there as well. But Brian did admit that some of Warren's body parts were disposed of in that river. Now, with all of the information that they were just given, there was a lot to unpack here. Obviously, police had a lot to figure out just based off of what Brian had told them. So they decided at this point to have Brian sit unhandcuffed, might I add, in the back of a police car while deputies then spoke to Brian's parents. One of the deputies that was on the scene decided at this point to walk inside of the home and go to the kitchen sink just to confirm that the human head was in fact real. They did have to confirm that. So he walked into the home, walked to the kitchen sink, and was able to confirm that it was in fact a real human head that was decapitated inside of this plastic bag. At this point, police then went to go speak with Brian's parents, who were also in the driveway, and really get their understanding as to what happened leading up to this. And Brian Sr. recounted from the early morning hours of February 28th when his son had called him, telling him that he had driven his car into the river. Brian Sr. said that he had no inkling, no idea whatsoever at that point when Brian drove his car into the river that anything was wrong. He thought it was weird that his son was out in this remote area at this boat ramp, but he didn't read too much into it. He was just wanting to know that his son was okay and to get the car fixed. That is where his mind was at. And so to hear and see all of these things that are unfolding, and now to know that his son is a murderer, it was heartbreaking for everyone. Brian's parents, Terry and Brian Sr., were visibly upset. They were distraught when they discovered the news about their son. And I will say, to their credit, they were completely cooperative from start to finish throughout this entire case, throughout this entire investigation. They did not make excuses for their son. They were very forthcoming with all of the information that they gave police. Again, very cooperative. And when they knew that something was wrong, they immediately contacted authorities. When the body parts were discovered in the closet, they immediately called authorities without asking any questions to Brian, without bringing it to him first. They went straight to police. Now, at this point, deputies decided to transfer the entire Kohi family to the sheriff's office to continue questioning. They drove Brian in one patrol car, and the rest of the family followed behind them down to the station. Now, in the car, while Brian was being transported to the sheriff's office, Brian actually pointed out the exact bridge, which was the crime scene of where he murdered Warren. The bridge was nearby Crosby Avenue, and it was also very close to the sheriff's office itself. Now, when Brian pointed this out, the deputy that was driving Brian radioed this information over to the other officers and gave them Brian's statement, which is when other officers were dispatched out to the bridge. Now, when they got there, they began looking around, and it did not take them very long to discover behind one of the pillars at the bridge 3 additional body parts. They discovered 2 arms and a leg at this bridge. And this again confirmed Brian's account, and police had the forensics team dispatched out to the scene to retrieve the body parts, and through DNA, they were able to confirm that those body parts did in fact belong to Warren Barnes. Now, once the entire family arrived to the sheriff's department, Brian and his family, they were all separated into different interview rooms. Brian was separated, the parents were separated, and we're going to start with Terry's interview specifically. So in Terry's interview, she was asked if Brian had any mental health struggles or if he struggled from any mental disabilities growing up. And as I had mentioned to you earlier, Terry went on to explain that Brian was diagnosed with ADHD and that he was on and off different medications for that. She said that he was also on anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication. She said that she wasn't 100% confident that Brian was taking his medication because she didn't physically see him take it, but Brian told her that he was taking it, and she watched as the pills lessened each and every day. So she again believed that her son was taking it. There's never really been any confirmation on that one way or another, but she said that Brian had the medication, and from her understanding, he was taking it. She then went on to say that the doctor had diagnosed Brian with autism and also told Terry that she should consider getting Brian tested for potential psychosis disorder based off of some of the behaviors that he was exhibiting. Now, Terry said that she did try and get these tests done. She did try and do that, but no office that she was recommended to for these tests would take Brian. She said that the closest office that she could get him into at that time was in Denver, and they just struggled A, finding the time to go out there, and B, finding the finances to go out there. It was very expensive to do that, so they never got around to going out there to do that. The drive from Grand Junction to Denver is about 3 hours and 45 minutes, so it definitely wasn't just an easy drive down the street. Terry went on to say that Brian's diagnosis for all of these conditions occurred in middle school for him, and the reason that she started to pay attention to this in general is because she just noticed some odd behavior coming from her son to begin with. One of the things that she noticed is how her son would really say and do anything to try and instigate other children. He would try and get a reaction out of people. He would say things to get people mad or riled up. And he was actually suspended from school multiple times for this behavior. His mom used an example of a girl in his class being very skittish and afraid of loud noises. And Brian, knowing this, tried to push this button multiple times. He got called out for it by the administrators and the teachers, and Brian continued to do this. And then ultimately one day, Brian went up behind this girl and did a very loud clap in her ear, and she obviously did not react well to that, and Brian got suspended because of it. Now, Terry also said that Brian hyperfixated on crime and crime scenes, but again, as I've mentioned multiple times, she figured that that interest would be fueled into a career in law enforcement. Terry also said that Brian was working with a counselor who specialized in working with autistic children, and that the counselor had stated that she never thought that Brian was a threat to himself or to others, and Terry truthfully believed that to be the case as well. She said all in all, she knew that Brian was different mentally, but she never would have imagined that her son would do something to this magnitude or extent. Now, as far as Brian Sr., he sat down with authorities and he said that both of his sons did okay in school. They didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they weren't rebellious, so he was never overly concerned about his son's behavior. He even said in his interview that his biggest complaint of Brian and Brian's friends was that they would stay up too late and play video games and drink soda when they came over to spend the night and for sleepovers. But along with that, he was very upfront over the fact that him and Terry both recognized that Brian was mentally a little bit different growing up, some of his suspicious behavior and concerning behavior. But again, he also claimed, similar to Terry, that there was no indication that Brian would ever do something of this magnitude. He said that Brian had never been in a physical fight. He had never been violent. He had never gotten into a fight, period, with family members or friends. So again, he was shocked to see such a giant major jump. It seemed like a complete 180. So now, with that being said, now that we've talked about Brian's parents and their viewpoint on this, let's get to Brian's interview. Now, Brian waived his Miranda rights and he agreed to talk to detectives, and he repeated in his interview that he, in fact, murdered Warren Barnes. He said that he did not know Warren, but he painted the picture of the night of February 27th. He went on to explain that he has major depressive disorder and that he was not in a good state that night. He said the night of the 27th was a full moon, and he decided to, in order to clear his head and also to see the full moon, that he would go for a drive. Now, while Brian was driving and while he was driving under the specific bridge that Warren was was murdered at, he claimed that he saw what he referred to as a strange shape by the railroad tracks underneath the bridge. Now, he said that he stopped his car, he investigated what was going on, and he discovered that it was Warren underneath the bridge. Now, when he saw Warren, he said that Warren was sleeping and he had a tarp over him almost as a blanket or a cover on him. And at this point, Brian said he then went back to his car, put on 3 pairs of gloves in order to deter any sort of DNA transfer. He then grabbed his knife that was in his glove box, walked up to Warren, who was sleeping at the time, pulled the canvas back that was covering him, straddled Warren, and began stabbing him to death. Brian said that he started stabbing him in his neck, and obviously when this happened, Warren woke up and was asking over and over again why Brian was doing this. Obviously, Warren was in a state of shock. After stabbing for what Brian claimed was a minute and a half, Brian said he then decapitated Warren's head, his hands, and his arms. Now, Brian's original plan was to take the decapitated head and the hands because he figured that those would be the closest forms to DNA identification for police to be able to identify Warren. So he figured that those would be the body parts that he would take and he would leave the rest underneath the bridge. Now, obviously, we know that didn't exactly turn out to be what ended up happening. So we will get to why things ended up transpiring the way that they did in a quick moment. But initially, Brian took the head and the hands, put them in plastic bags, and drove back home with them. So he initially went back to his house. That is the first thing that we need to know, is that after the murder occurred, Brian didn't immediately drive out to the river. He actually went home first. He said that once he got home, he took all the garbage that had blood on it and he threw it away. He also put the outfit and the clothes that he was wearing when he murdered Warren into the washing machine and washed them twice. At that point, he said that he put the head and the hands in his closet and tried to go to sleep. But while he was trying to fall asleep, he began getting very anxious and he began getting very worried because he said that he remembered during the murder, one of the gloves that he was wearing actually tore through, and he was worried that his DNA was going to be transferred somehow onto Warren's body that was still left underneath the bridge. So he was worried that police were going to be able to link this murder back to him. So because of this, he decided that he needed to get ahead of that before it happened. So at that point, he got out of bed, got back in his car, and drove back to the murder site where the remainder of Warren's body was. He said at this point, he picked up Warren's torso, but left his arms and one of his legs at the scene. He then put the torso in his car and drove to the Blue Heron drop-off ramp at the Colorado River and put the body parts into the river and disposed of them that way. He said that he didn't touch them with his hands. He actually just used his feet to kick them into the river. And it was after doing that he got back into his car and tried to drive off of the boat ramp, but instead, as we know, he ended up driving into the river instead. So the reason he was at the boat ramp to begin with was to dispose of the body parts. And again, that was not a part of the original plan. The original plan was to leave Warren's body where it was underneath the bridge, but Brian got nervous about the potential fibers that could have been left behind while he was murdering him, which is what prompted him to go back to the body and bring it to the bridge. Now, Brian was very clear with police that he did not anticipate on murdering Warren that night. He again said that he didn't know Warren. Warren was a stranger to him. He didn't anticipate on murdering anyone that night, but he did admit that he had been wondering what it would be like to murder someone for a very long time. He went on to say that murdering Warren was much easier than he originally anticipated. He said that he had so much adrenaline during the act of the kill that he was actually growling and making animalistic noises as he was stabbing Warren to death. Brian said that Warren had called out asking Brian why he was trying to kill him, and that is when Brian told Warren, quote unquote, "I've been wanting to do this for a long time, murder someone." Brian did emphasize during his confession that he was not planning on murdering Warren that night. night. He said that he normally kept a knife inside of his glove box for self-defense purposes. So he said the knife was not randomly put in there that night. He always had a knife in his glove box. He just decided to use it that night. Now, during his confession, Brian was laughing and he was chuckling. He said that he wore a face mask to conceal his identity, and he actually made a joke about social distancing because it was the year 2020-21, and that was really one of the higher moments of COVID, and so he was making a joke about social distancing and wearing the face mask. He was definitely not seeming remorseful in the slightest. He didn't seem concerned or sad or nervous. He was joking and seemed lighthearted and very nonchalant. Now, like I said, Brian had said that he had been wondering what murdering someone would feel like for years at that point. He said that he had done a lot of research of different serial killers like Ted Bundy and the Zodiac, and according to him, he said that other serial killers have said that murdering was the greatest feeling in the world, and he wanted to try that. He said that he always knew that he would be in the sheriff's office one day, whether that be as a criminal or as a police officer himself. Brian did say, though, that unlike other serial killers, he received no sexual gratification from his killing. It was more so curiosity than anything else for Brian. As far as picking his victim, Brian said that he was aware enough to know that historically, police do not care as much about the well-being of the homeless community or of sex workers. So he was looking for his victim to be someone who lived that kind of lifestyle. And according to him, he said that he had been looking for a victim for approximately 6 months before the kill. Brian also revealed that oftentimes he would see women walking down the street, and while one part of him wanted to court women and impress them, Brian said the other half of him wondered what her head would look like on a stick. Brian went on to say he does not like people at all. He said that he had thoughts of shooting up his school, but he never did it. He also said that he was in the process of making a kill kit before his arrest. He had a hammer and knives and duct tape and other materials. He said that his parents had actually found his original kill kit that he was building about a year prior to this, and they threatened to call the authorities, but Brian was able to convince them that the kit was for something unrelated, and to appease his parents, Brian threw away that specific kit. So Brian said that he tried to make a kill kit before. His parents caught him. They made him throw it away. So then he started to make another one. So that is what I mean when I say that I do believe wholeheartedly that this was someone who would have turned out to be a serial killer. Brian said that after the murder, he was extremely anxious about getting caught. He was worried that the body would be found in the river, and the circumstantial evidence of his car going into the river would point back to him. He was worried that if someone found the body parts, they would link together the fact that his car and him were in that area during the time that the body would have been disposed of. Brian did say that he was not expecting for his mom to find the body parts in his room, and he was also surprised that his mom did not confront him first and instead called police. So he said that he was surprised about that, and he was also surprised that the police did not handcuff him. Now, contrary to my belief, Brian went on to say that had he not have been caught, he probably would not have killed again because he would have been so anxious about getting caught the first time, or for any future crimes he would have committed to have been linked back to Warren, so he would have never killed again. Now, Brian also confessed that he took pictures of Warren's body on his phone, but ended up deleting them because he knew that that was evidence that could be traced back to him, but the pictures were later recovered from his phone. After the interview, Brian was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with evidence. He pled not guilty by reason of insanity, and the defense argued that Brian murdered Warren because of his psychosis and other undiagnosed mental health conditions. They tried to argue that his mental illness prevented him from knowing right from wrong, while the prosecution, on the other hand, argued against this based off of the confession that Brian had already made. The trial lasted for 12 days, and on February 3rd of 2023, Brian was found guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and an additional 13 and a half years for the tampering with evidence charge. Brian is currently 23 years old, and he is being held at the Buena Vista Correctional Facility in Colorado Springs. And that, you guys, is the case of Warren Barnes. It's the case of Brian Kohi. And I'm so curious to hear what you guys have to say about this one. Whenever we do any case that we cover, it's heartbreaking and it's shocking and it's tragic. But to hear someone talk so blasé and so nonchalantly and so flippantly about something as horrific as death and murder and decapitation and dismembering a human body, when someone is so nonchalant about that and does not seem to understand the gravity of what they have done, or maybe it's not even understand, maybe it's more so not choosing to accept it, or maybe finding gratification in it. On the other hand, maybe it is that they know and they are satisfied with what they've done. It's always incredibly shocking to see a killer's point of view for this, because we typically cover cases where killers either don't admit to their killing, or they wait years before they confess, or when they do confess, they show remorse, whether that be true or false or real or fake or genuine or not. But to see someone come so forward being very matter of fact that they murdered someone, they enjoyed it, they dismembered a body, they enjoyed it. To me, I don't fully believe, and this is just my personal opinion, I'd be curious to hear yours, that Brian did not know the difference between right and wrong. Brian knew enough to try and conceal what he did. Brian knew well enough to try and get rid of the body. Brian knew well enough to try and not leave his DNA behind. Brian knew well enough, in my opinion, but I'm very curious to hear yours. So with that being said, you guys, make sure you leave all your comments below. But with that being said, you guys, it's going to be all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Killer Instinct. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name's Savannah. I'm your host of Killer Instinct. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well. So make sure you subscribe, and make sure you hit that Patreon link in the description box below if you're looking for more exclusive Killer Instinct content. But with that all being said, you guys, I will be back next week with a brand new one. And until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.